Hello, this is Silver Pride 2021. This is the big Saturday interview. I'm Rob Hastie, Artistic Director of Sheffield Theatres, and with me is actor, director, writer, everything, Simon Callow. How are you doing, Simon, in the heat of this eventual summer?
Well, it's nice. I have to say, I've just come back from Greece, and I brought this with me.
Oh,
So you should all be very grateful.
are you a summer person? Or do you is there a season that you feel more at home in? Do you like the heat?
um, as a child, from the ages of 9 to 12, I lived in Africa, and I detested it, every second of it. And the heat was the thing I hated. I was a very round, fat little child, and it was just hateful to me. But I think it sort of cured me or gave me a taste for it subliminally. So I liked the summer, but I'm not a sun worshipper of any kind. I'm incapable of lying on the beach. It's just completely out of the question for me. And I also love the cold. I mean, to tell you the truth, I love the seasons. I love weather, which is why Los Angeles is the most unattractive place on earth for me to be ever. It's just a place without seasons, and I love it. I love even looking at the garden and just seeing you can see beginning to see already the seeds of the disintegration of the summer, and I love that. I just adore it. So England's a very happy place for me to live in from a climatic point of view. Politically, it's another matter, but
Maybe we'll come on to a bit of that. You say you don't like lying on lying in the sun. That it strikes me that might be as much to do with not wanting to be idle as not wanting to be in the sunshine. You seem to be the most extraordinarily uh, busy artist. I was looking for the word actor or writer or director in there, but I think artist is probably. Well, would artist would you call yourself an artist?
sometimes. I think being an artist is something we aspire to and sometimes achieve. Now and then, very very occasionally, I give a performance where I think, yeah, that was the performance of an artist. But very often it's just the performance of a journeyman, and I struggle, to get it to the place in which where I actually find it not so much admirable as having a sort of particular kind of existence. I mean, you know this very well from your acting, there's a moment, a God-given moment, really, when suddenly everything falls into place. And as I've sometimes said, uh, I'm no longer playing the character is playing me. And at such moments I think, yes, I'm functioning like an artist. But same thing with writing. I mean, writing is it's hard work, and I love it. It's work I love. It's what I wanted to be long before I ever wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a writer, and I love it. I love the toil of it, but it is toil nonetheless. I was incredibly relieved when I was you know 16 or 17 and aspiring to be a writer. And my favorite writer was Christopher Isherwood, who remains one of my very favorite authors, and one of the ones who, as a craftsman, I admire so much. And the wonderful thing about his prose is how effortless it is, seemingly. And so one day, as a boy, I went off to the British Museum, and there happened to be an exhibition of manuscripts, and there was a manuscript of Goodbye to Berlin, and every second word was changed 3 times, 4 times, bits stuck off the side, and so on. I thought, well, that's incredibly encouraging, because it's all comes down to work in the end, but it's doing the right kind of work, that once it's done releases everything else.
Does it? It's hearing you talk about acting and being in that moment on that stage. The work is never complete in a sense, but it has a moment. It exists only in the moment. Whereas with writing, presumably you're working to a deadline, but in a sense, it can never be over. You could continue to edit forever. Does it?
Yes. I mean, you can, of course, if you're acting in the theatre, in a way, you can do that, but except the following night, and that's the wonderful thing. And then, of course, we have the opposite with film, which is that's it. Too bad. If it wasn't right, that's it. Last chance saloon, you know.
And do you ever get your acting and your writing selves muddled in your heart? Do you ever feel like can the one ever feel like the other when you're doing it?
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because I've just been acting in a film for Mark Gatiss, a remake of The Amazing Mr. Blunden, which is a 1973 film. It was the second film Lionel Jeffries directed after The Railway Children. And Mark and I are very, 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 very close friends, and we've worked together before, and we're on the same wavelength, absolutely. So I was studying the script a long time before we actually shot it, and I kind of I realized that when I work properly and seriously, and probably many of us, I'm just as capable of doing slipshod work, you know. But when I really, really, really focused on something, what I try to do so much is to penetrate into the mind of the author. And in a way, that almost becomes like writing, because as I'm going deeper into the man I'm playing, I'm reaching the point where the author started from, you know, the sort of sensation of the character. And sometimes, even in Mark's wonderful script, I just had a intense feeling that something wasn't quite, it wasn't releasing the rest of the scene, you know, something was just stopping. And of course, as an actor, you can easily sort of glide over that and just say, blah, 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 say it very quickly, or maybe not say it at all. But because of, you know, my huge respect for Mark and so on, I would go to him and say, I'm sorry, but I do feel that this is, you know, there's something, and he would always say, fine, what would you rather say? What do you think he would say? And I know that that's right. And once, when I was directing, actually, oddly enough, I directed Shirley Valentine in the original London production with Pauline Collins, and it's a wonderful script. I mean, it's just a fantastic, sublime script. And when I got that in my hands and they said, you know, will you direct this? I thought, my God, I've won the lottery. You know, this is just so wonderful. This, and there was just there was something didn't pay off about a certain phrase. But Willie's very, you know, strict about his text. And so I didn't like to say anything until the last week of rehearsal. I said, Willie, sorry, this is tormenting me, but I'm absolutely convinced the rhythm of this thing demands 3 phrases, and you've only given it 1 phrase. And he said, well, you know, he said, you've really got into this, haven't you? We cut those 2 phrases in the last rehearsal in the original production in Liverpool, and I never wanted it cut, but they insisted. So I must be functioning a bit like a writer, you know, insofar as I got picked up on that. But words have always been the starting point for me of so much. I mean, I was one of those kids who learnt to read quite late. And I remember the day I learned to read. My mother was a secretary in a rather eccentric boarding school in Goring-on-Thames, and I was 5 when she took that job, and I was sort of, my education as such was thrown in as part of it, but it wasn't a primary school. So really, I was handed over to the headmaster's mother, a wonderful old woman called Mrs. Birch, hirsute woman with a faint tincture of sherry on her breath at all times, and I adored this woman absolutely. And she, together, I learned how to read at her knee, and she said, "All right, go and tell your mother. Go on, go and tell your mother." So I went over to my mother. I found my mother in her office, and I said, "I can read." And my mother said to me, rather magnificently, you now have in your hands a key with which you can open the treasure trove of the world.
You actually said that. You remember that?
Actual words, yeah. Well, you would, wouldn't you? If somebody said something like that. I mean, it was so, she said it magisterially, you know, and it impressed me enormously. I thought, oh, I see. I'm, and from then on, I couldn't read enough. I read everything. And in those days, in my grandmother's house, I particularly remember it was the time when if you washed the kitchen floor or any floor, I suppose, you would put newspapers down on top of it to stop people from tramping through the house with wet feet. And if ever I was absent, if they couldn't find me, they'd always go to the scullery and I'd be on the floor reading the Financial Times upside down because it was just manna to me. I just loved it and still do. I'm a very promiscuous reader. I just read everything, anything. And I sometimes don't read what I should be reading because something else catches my eye and I'm just reading. And I tear pages out of the newspaper to make sure that I do read them eventually. And they're there in piles all over the house.
Hundreds of half-read books.
Yes. Oh, God, yeah.
Tell me more about your grandmother, because whenever I've heard you talk about her in the past, I always think she sounds like, if I was trying to get to the heart of what makes Simon Callow want to perform, it sounds like your grandmother must have had something to do with that. She reminds me of Elsie, who's 74 in Noel Coward's "I've Been to a Marvelous Party."
Yes. Well, she was sort of, yes. That's indeed well spotted. She's my mother's mother. I had two grandmothers, but no grandfathers. I had no men in my family growing up at all, not except for a couple of cousins, older men who did come and visit once or twice, and that was so exciting. But normally it was women. It was my mother and I lived alone together, my father having absconded when I was 18 months old. My both grandmothers, both grandfathers had died. A great-grandmother, my great-grandfather having died, I mean, like 50 years before. She was 98 when she died, my great-grandmother. And a couple of aunts, and then a load of women who were known as aunts, you know, all those women, one called Auntie Daisy, Auntie whatever, whoever. And and I had a great aunt as well. And my French, that's my father's mother was French, and her name was Toto, and her sister was Titi, and my great grandmother was Meme. So it was all kind of like that. But my mother's mother was known as Mater by everybody. I mean, we weren't a posh family. I mean, we were, what my family is nouveau pauvre. We had sort of declined in the world in financial situation. When she was a girl, my grandmother lived in a great big house and had servants. But by the time she was in her mid-30s, she was working in an underground kitchen because her husband was an engineer and there was no work for him in the 30s at all. And she did that. But she was very grand in manner, and she'd been an actress. She went on the stage in the chorus. She had a wonderful voice. She was a singer. I mean, she was a wonderful singer. But she joined the chorus and she ran away. And very typical of her, she told me that the reason that she stopped and left the theatre was because one of the other chorus girls shared a bed with her and one night got a bit sexy, and that my grandmother couldn't handle that at all, and she left the theatre. Also,
when did she tell you that? I'm curious. Just sorry to pause you mid-flow, but when did you know that story about the?
When I was about 12. My grandmother was a person without boundaries, and she had no conception of age whatever. And she told me she was very interested in sex, very keen on it. And she told me extraordinary details about my grandfather, who died long before She said, you know, you're very grown up, darling. You understand about these things. But he was one of those men who just takes you and it's all over in 20 seconds, you know. And she said, and that was, you know. And often he was angry when he came to me. And it was in a moment like that that your mother was conceived. Because she didn't get on very well with my mother. So that was her explanation for that. She was, I mean, if I will probably say a few things about her that make her sound eccentric, but nobody would have thought she was eccentric. She was just, she had a certain way of being in the world. But for example, she loved crossword puzzles, absolutely adored crossword puzzles. And when she got the right answer, she filled it in regardless of whether it was the right number of letters. And she just tacked on boxes on the end. She thought that's what you did, you know. Very satisfying it must have been. And, or else also having the sense of no real sense of how old or whatever one was. When I was, again, about 12 or 13, I'd go and see her, and I always had a little drink. She thought that was a very fitting. I'd have a glass of sherry or something like that. And then when I left the house, she'd give me some sweets, you know, Fox's Glacier mints, and maybe some biscuits, and a couple of cigarettes, because I was smoking away at that time as well, and a handful of antibiotics. She'd say, they're wonderful, darling. They're absolutely marvelous. You must have them. They're the best thing. They've done me so much good. But I said, but I'm not ill, Grandma, or rather, Mater. And she'd say, oh, no, they must be. They're so good for me. They must be good for you too. So that was the sort of thing. Now, we had a most astonishingly intimate relationship. I was always cuddling her in bed, and then of a Saturday morning, when I often used to go over to my grandmother's house from my mother's house to help. I would, you know, actually earn some pocket money by help cleaning the house and doing the brass and all of that kind of thing. But one of my other tasks was to swab her down. She was a bit crippled. She couldn't move very easily, so she'd just sort of drop her clothes, and it was like cleaning the car on a Sunday morning. I'd take a big sponge and kind of lift up her massive pendulous breasts and scrub. You know, we were just like, we were so at ease with each other. And earlier, and even later, I'd dress up in her clothes, of course, and she'd dress up in other clothes, and we'd play out scenes, and she'd dance for me. She was, I think, must have been a wonderful dancer in her youth, and maybe in her 20s and 30s. She was a woman built on a certain scale, in that rather Edwardian kind of scale of woman, but she could dance. She would do old-fashioned waltzing, you know, which is sort of double time. And she had dainty little feet, though her actual legs were heavily swollen, which is part of why she couldn't move around very much or go out very much. But when I'd put on a Johann Strauss album on the record player, she'd whiz around the room with the lightest of feet. It was beautiful. It was lovely. We just adored each other. Both her daughters hated her. So we were there was a sort of war going on a bit between, and they didn't think it was healthy that I spent so much time with my grandmother in this kind of way, and so on. But as you rightly say, all the theatre in me basically comes from my grandmother. Although I must say it's also in my blood, insofar as that means anything at all. But her father-in-law, my great-grandfather, therefore, was Danish, and he was a clown in Copenhagen at the Tivoli Gardens. He was a clown, and then he joined the circus and became a ringmaster. And there he met my great grandmother, who was French, called Thérèse Tournière, and she was a bareback horse rider. And these stories came to him. He was dead. I'll tell you more though about him. They came to England together, I think, to pursue those careers, but they didn't work out. And so he became an impresario, and he managed a troupe of midgets. It was called Dr. Zaynard's Lilliputians, the 40 cleverest little men and women in the world. I have the playbill, as it were, and they dressed up in tails and all the rest of it. And my grandmother, who lived next door to them, to her father-in-law's family, remembers them turning up for afternoon tea, in coaches, and a whole fantastic ritual of them coming and having tea, dressed up in evening gowns and so on. So my great grandfather then, after that venture, I suppose, must have failed, went and joined forces with Sir Oswald Stoll at the Colosseum, the great music hall manager and impresario, and my grandfather was his right-hand man for a while, but the alcohol finally did for him, and he messed up all the bookings. You know how complicated it was as the music halls extended outwards into the suburbs. So the people at the bottom of the bill in London in the centre of town, would gradually edge out towards the far distant music halls where they'd be the top of the bill. And it was an incredibly complex thing, and they moved from one hall to another. And my grandfather just blew it completely. And one day, and Sir Oswald Stoll tore up his contract into 1,000 pieces and put it into an envelope and said, "You're sacked." So there's the theatre there. As I said, about say, I thought, because my grandmother she was the custodian of family history. That's another thing which I owe her so much. She was so fascinated by family and family history, and so I got all these details from her, and some of them were just completely wrong. Even I knew they were completely wrong. She kept on insisting that her family were German originally. They were from Dusseldorf, which I happened to know, but she believed that they were from Vienna, but they weren't at all from Vienna. And she believed that they were Habsburgs, and that, of course, is absolutely ludicrous. Her grandfather came from Dusseldorf. He was a painter, and he came to Marlborough College to be the painting teacher at Marlborough College. And there's still something at Marlborough College which is called Floyce's Arch. Floyce being his name, Floyce's Arch, which was where you went to make up quarrels. It was underneath the art room, and it's still called that, which is rather nice. So, she wove all these wonderful stories together, and I absolutely didn't believe that my great grandmother was a bareback horse rider. It was just too much, one detail too many, until somebody married into our family, and she was a really impassioned genealogist, and she discovered that not only was Thérèse Tournière a bareback horse rider, but the Tournières were one of the most famous equestrian acts of the time, and her grandfather, Thérèse's grandfather, had opened a hippodrome in St. Petersburg, and it was a great success. And when he left it, the Tsar, who had loved this hippodrome, gave him as a parting gift Napoleon's horse, which is called something like Splendid or whatever you can imagine. And he took it around Europe for years. This woman, I have all the documentary evidence for it. It's astonishing, thrilling. I mean, I love that. I mean, that history, that romance of history is just charming.
So, we're here for Silver Pride.
Yeah.
Describe all of the women in your life as the older women in your life as a young man. Were there any visible gay men in your world, in your life as you were growing up? Were there anyone who's an influence as a gay adult that you can remember?
The only person that I could describe in that way was when one has the great luck to have a teacher at school that really gets one and one gets. And I was lucky enough to have as my French teacher a remarkable man called Nick Frizel, and he'd come to England. I know exactly what the background is. He'd come to England when France fell, and he joined the resistance in England and trained, and for 4 years he was dropped into France, and as a commando, I suppose he must have been, and eventually when the war ended, he woke up the next morning and all his hair had fallen out, and then it all grew back again, but half black and half white, like this. And when I knew him, that's how his hair was. He was, he became a teacher, and he was a very striking looking man. But he was a revelation because he made, it was a Catholic grammar school, and the teaching was primitive, really. It was just about passing exams and being pious, And I think most of the teachers had, I don't know what I shouldn't really speak ill of them all, because they meant well, I have no doubt, but it was not stimulating, not at all. And I was a kid who really wanted to learn and to read, and couldn't get enough of it. And Nick suddenly, first of all teaching French, and then he became head of history as well. And his elucidations of history were just phenomenal. I mean, it made sense, who knows now whether I would subscribe to them, but he absolutely, and he expected us to analyze things, not to be told stories or facts, but to think about why things happened the way they happened. It was absolutely fantastic. But then it sort of dawned on me that Nick might be gay. And anyway, later, when I was in the sixth form, and we were by now, insofar as a pupil and a teacher in a day school, not a boarding school, can have a sort of relationship or a friendship. We would often speak to each other about this and that and the other. And then eventually, rather bravely, he invited me to come to his flat. He lived in Chelsea, and the school was in Chelsea, just around the corner in Smith Street, off King's Road. This is 1960s. This is King's Road. I was Lord Kitchener's valet and all of that stuff. It was the whole hippie thing. It was carnival. And anyway, I'd go to Nick's, and Nick then gave me this phenomenal education in so many things. He cooked for me. My grandmothers were both wonderful cooks, but Nick was a different kind of a cook. He would rustle very simple things up, which were just inexpressibly delicious to have, omelets and whatever. And then he'd play me music. He played me Pelléas et Mélisande. He played me Mozart. He played me so many composers that I didn't know about. I knew something about classical music, but he took me into areas of the repertory that I just didn't know about at all. And he gave me an edition of Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal and all kinds of books. And we talked about everything. And he talked about homosexuality. And I didn't. And he said, I could have been gay, but my religion forbids it. But there's nothing wrong with it, he said, but my religion is against it. And we talked about the games teacher, who I am convinced was a repressed gay man, a sadist, a really horrid man, and sort of a bit queenie with it, and awful. And he said, yes, well, that's what happens if you repress it for the wrong reasons. I've made a choice. So it was a very grown-up conversation to have. By then I was the head boy of the school and all the rest of it. So it was quite, I was 18, so I was 17, and I was absolutely, I knew a thing or two about the world. I myself had no sex with anyone at that time. It was very elusive. I couldn't figure out who was gay at school. And of course, now I think back on it, I guess I was very candid about being it, though. Now I think of it, it's absolutely extraordinary that I always said, they'd say, boys, when we were 13 or 14, they say, who'd you fancy? And they suppose Diana Dawes or, whatever. And I'd say Cliff Richard, who I did fancy. It was very dishy indeed. I'd say Cliff Richard, and they go, wow. So you're queer, are you? And I say, yeah. And they'd say, wow. And there was never any edge to it at all. I never, ever had a thing, ever. And I have to say, probably it is true in the whole of my life. I've never suffered any kind of homophobia. And some of it, that might be possibly because I was so open. I don't know why I was so. It's a very courageous thing to do, but I didn't feel courageous about it. I just said it. I knew that I was fantasizing about boys all the time, and some of them indeed. But but they didn't. They were everybody was talking about sex all the time. And sometimes the boys would run around going, I wish I was queer. I want to be queer. I want to be queer. It was very odd. This is a Catholic Catholic grammar school in the 60s. So maybe being in Chelsea and all of that has something to do with it. It was very, sexually fluid and so on. But I'm still amazed about it now. And there were odd things where I had a terrific crush on a boy that I sat next to in my class, and Peter Lee is called, and I never said anything to him, but he knew that I fancied him like mad, and he'd kind of pull his dick out and then put it back again and just wait to see what my reaction would be. I just froze, actually. But this is in the classroom, while the teacher was teaching. You go, look at me. Wow. It was extraordinary. So in a way, it was a bit tormenting, but in another way, it was very open. It was real. It existed. It wasn't like something that was I was pretending about at all. And my best friend, Eamon, who wasn't gay, and I had a great friendship with a girl who he eventually started to have an affair with, and then married, and then divorced. But and we all went away on holiday together, the three of us. But they absolutely knew that I was gay, but they couldn't. Eamon would say, "But it's so great, fucking a girl is so great. You really have to do it." I didn't really fancy it, I'd say I just didn't really fancy it, and he'd say, "Oh," and then whenever after we left school, he'd phone me and say, "You still gay? You still gay? Are you? Are you still queer?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I don't think it's something you grow out of." I mean, I think no, it was a long time. I wasn't until 21 before I actually got together with a guy, and then it sort of all let rip after that. But that was at drama school. But what then happened? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say I remember reading Being an Actor as a young man, and in amongst all of the stuff that was blowing my mind, as an aspiring actor myself, I remember you being really candid quite early on about losing your virginity at drama school, and thinking,
yeah.
Both then, brilliant. I'm sorry.
What was it even a bit odder in a way was that I left school not wanting to go to university. I'd had enough of analysis and thinking and reading and all of that. I wanted to do something else. I couldn't figure out what to do. I did toy with going to university, and then I wanted to study Romanian, because I thought, well, there can't be many people who speak Romanian in England. That would be interesting. I'd find myself in an interesting situation. But anyway, I didn't qualify for that. So I just got a job in a bookshop where else, and a bookshop that I knew and used very much. But it was in the library wholesale department. It was a kind of a bit of a bore, actually. If you love books, it's not such fun transporting Mills and Boon books around the office, from shelf to shelf. I absolutely had a huge crush on Billy Hill's, an extreme, he was a member of the Communist Party, extreme left-wing, but sweet boy, lovely, adorable. I think he might have been gay, but I don't think he knew it at all. And I simply didn't have the courage to do anything. So eventually, I then, this is in Being an Actor, I wrote a letter to Laurence Olivier, and Laurence Olivier wrote back and said, "Why didn't you come and work here? There's a job in the box office." And so I came and worked in the box office. And then, for the first time in my life, I encountered gay people who were definitely gay. And it was such a relief and release to know that people that I admired, the actors, but not just the actors, backstage, stage hands, people in the box office, so many gay people. I mean, it was a sort of gay paradise. This is the National Theatre at the Old Vic, and quite a lot of the actors, Jeremy Brett and all those kind of people, were very openly gay. Charlie Kay and so on, Derek Jacobi, they were all gay, but only within the confines of the theatre, not outside. Nobody had come out as gay at all, and were seriously warned against that. And it would have been terrible for them. People were still being arrested, right up until, the well, for a long time. I mean, right up until the 80s, actually. But however, it was an absolute haven, and people could really be free. And it's the first time I encountered campness in that way, and dishy stagehands who would sort of had nipple rings and things like that. It was a sort of carnival. But then I had the opposite thing, which is I thought, fuck, they're so confident in their sexuality, and I don't know what to do. I've never had sex with anybody, anybody. What am I going to do? Oh. So I was a bit paralyzed by that. Anyway, I went off to university to learn, as I thought, to act. And Belfast in 1968 was not the ideal place to go if you wanted sexual liberation. It has to be said. So I spent a pretty fallow period sexually there too, though I did discover a very important thing, that when I went to act in the Drama Society, that I was terrible. I was an awful actor. But that's a great revelation to have. It really was so helpful, because I thought, no, I really must go to drama school. So I left after a year, came back to town, and then spent a year in the box office of the Aldwych Theatre and the Mermaid Theatre, those two box offices. Wonderful time. Wonderful friends I made who are still friends. And then I went to drama school, to the Drama Centre, and it was astonishing how quickly everything happened from the sexual point of view. I just sort of suddenly, somebody just, in fact, an older man, not at the Drama Centre, just invited me for a drink and very kindly just made it all very nice and lovely. And then I thought, oh, I see. This is what you do. And then I was off, like a greyhound out of the trap. So there was that strange period. And the Drama Centre was, I don't think there were that many gay people there, actually, but I got to know them all, shall we say. And both the two teachers, the principal and the head of the school, Christopher Fettis and Yat Malmgren, were lovers. They lived with each other, and they were very openly gay. No question about that at all. And but then my 3 years at drama school were the making of me completely, in so many ways. It's the best period of my life, in a sense. I don't mean that nostalgically. I just mean that it happened to be the place where, when you really find who you are, find what you're supposed to be doing with your life, discover like-minded people, are in touch with teachers who are inspired and absolutely keep opening door after door after door for you. Well, it's a wonderful time.
So, in your development as a gay man, you're as a child, it's uncomplicated, or as a teenager, it's uncomplicated, and then you go to the National, and it's all about the glamour and the camp and the nipple rings, and then you go to drama school and sex happens. Because your career kind of worked in tandem with quite a politicized gay identity through Gay Sweatshop and through
that came a bit out of the blue. I was, as I say, totally open with everybody about being gay, but I wasn't. I was a bit of a slouch politically, as far as that's concerned. I just thought, oh, well, actually, it's fine for us. Remembering back to the National and any company that I was in, I never encountered anybody who was homophobic in a company, obviously an acting company. And then this thing came from Gay Sweatshop, and I thought, do I really want to be part of this militancy? It's a bit boring. Militancy, don't you think? I said to my friends, and they kind of went, well, it's probably it's just I don't want to be identified as a gay man, I think. And then I read the play, and I got it in one. It was an enchanting play by Martin Sherman, who went on to write Bent, of course. It was called Passing By, and it's about two young guys who pick each other up in the cinema, in a nice art cinema, and then they fall in love, they're together. Then one of them catches hepatitis and gives it to the other one, and they nurse each other through that. But by the end of that, the relationship is sort of run its course, and they part. It's a terrifically simple story. And I just thought the characters are so wonderful, and how wonderful it would be to do a play about being gay. I can see that it would. I'd not played a gay man up to that point, so it'd be wonderful to do that. That'd be just great. It wasn't until we did it in front of the audience, and it was in a wonderful, long defunct theatre called the Almost Free Theatre in Rupert Street, run by the famous Ed Berman, and the name denotes what happened. You paid as much as you could. Anyway, they did a season. Gay Sweatshop already existed. They'd done a season before, but now they did a season in Rupert Street in the Almost Free Theatre. And I can't think, maybe ours was the first in that season. I can't quite remember. But the point is that it wasn't until I stood on the stage with Michael Dickinson, who was my fellow actor, and realized that the audience was 98% gay, and that this story now was no longer just a simple story. It was the story of their lives that they'd never seen before on a stage. And even now, it moves me to think of that, because the atmosphere in the auditorium was unbelievable. The identification, the gratitude in a way for being allowed to see a story like this. Because it wasn't that there wasn't any presence of gay people in the West End. There was a lot. There was Danny LaRue, and there was Boys in the Band, for God's sake, which I'd seen and been astounded at its audacity. But it was, of course, as it is, it's a depressing play in the end. It presents gay life as a dreadful, cliquey and depressing phenomenon. At least it seemed that way. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way, but it's been subsequently done, and people have taken that edge off it. But that's very much how it felt. But to do a play about gay people, which was just totally positive, where being gay was not merely not a problem in the play, it was never mentioned. Nor indeed was Judy Garland, or indeed one's mother. There was no dimension of it which was in any way spelt out. It was just, here are two guys who find each other fantastically attractive and who fall in love and have a glorious affair, and then it goes slightly wrong, and then they part. And that was the whole of the story. But it's sometimes the case that art, and especially theatre art, can be exceptionally potent by simply telling the truth. Not in a militant way. There was nothing militant about this play. It was just, here we are, and we have every right. But no, that wasn't said. It was evident. You would infer that. Anybody looking at that play would say, of course, why wouldn't these guys who are in love with each other have an affair together? Of course, it's natural. It's totally human and normal and great. That was always my big, you see, I never, at the time when I became involved in gay, I never really was part of gay politics as such. When I became more identified as a gay person, it was there was a very angry militant section of the gay population, of whom Derek Jarman was a particularly articulate spokesperson, who literally believed in a separate state for gay people. That the heterosexual history had so failed homosexuals that they had no right ever to associate with us anymore, and that we should all just go away and lead our completely self-contained lives. I never believed that for a minute. What I always believed in is that being gay is a perfectly normal part of the human condition. And subsequently, many decades later, the T-shirt said it all. Some people are gay, get over it. It's a wonderfully succinct articulation of a particular kind of a political philosophy. Now, of course, it's not. That's not going to work. It's not going to be, you can't possibly just say that. I mean, that won't work. People aren't that easily, convinced. But for me, that was the goal. That was always the goal. And that has been increasingly the case. But it's really taken time. And I attribute a lot of that development to television soaps, for example, which rather wonderfully showed, first of all, they were inclined to show being gay as a problem, and then increasingly they just represented a world in which some people are gay, and in that way people finally came to accept the idea that maybe your neighbor will be gay, maybe your brother will be gay, maybe your father is gay. I mean, these things are all part of life, and it's okay. I mean, that the battle will never be completely won, because there is no limit to the dark rage inside some people, and for whatever reason, and that will always be with us, and we have to always be on our guard against it. But it is certainly my impression that the world at large now has undergone a massive sea change about these things. But then I'm always mindful that it can all change. You never know. It depending on what happens in the volatile state of our world today. It can change, even though these things are enshrined in law. It can change. So you can never completely relax. However, enjoy the fact. I think we should all enjoy the fact that life has become very much more pleasant than it was. I also always have to say at this point that, as I said to you earlier, I've never experienced direct homophobia myself, and I've never felt threatened. I've never felt in physical danger, and there are many gay people who have, and that is a terrifying thing, and we all have to ensure that doesn't happen ever. It's eliminated, and it never happens again, and that's a hard job. And Peter Tatchell, for example, is absolutely right to be on the permanent lookout for that. Peter's a sort of a bit of a hero of mine. I don't really absolutely agree with everything he says by any means, but my God, that man. You see, there's a sort of heroism. I can only look. I'm just here I am, as I say. I've had this incredibly easy life as far as being gay is concerned, and there's Peter beaten black and blue for protesting and standing up for people's rights. It's heroism of a high order.
So what is the responsibility of the actor, the writer, now to keep our guard up against encroaching hatred?
Well, telling the truth is what writers and artists do best. Telling the truth. Not, in my view, necessarily fighting for change. I think that can be part of it, but I don't think that's an inherent part of it. It's telling the truth, saying this is the situation. You, the audience, now have to think about this and make your minds up. I'm not a fan of agitprop. I never have been, really. I think it's very much preaching to the choir, unfortunately. I think it just confirms what people feel, and sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's necessary to rally people. But a play like The Normal Heart, which I notice is being revived at the National, is a play that told the truth about the situation that people find themselves in. And the audience, which was, of course, often very many of the audience were gay, but it was also very much a straight audience too. And they got the message I mean, I think that play had a huge influence, a massive influence, Larry Kramer's play.
Yeah. I can't not mention, seeing as you've talked about visibility, and I know you've talked about this an enormous amount in the past, but Four Weddings and a Funeral for me was, if you, when you talk about that, the gift of visibility you gave that audience for Gay Sweatshop, that was my experience watching as a teenager, watching Four Weddings and a Funeral, and seeing that and thinking, and mining your scenes for every little detail of what does their flat look like, and what do they have. Oh my god, just gay people I can see. I can
I
see
know,
myself.
I know.
Um,
It was wonderful. I mean, when I read the script first, and I was sitting, I was directing at My Fair Lady in Manchester, and I was sitting next to the producer, and I said, "I'm sorry, I've got." We were on the plane together, and I said, "I've just got to read the script. I've just been sent the script, and I've got to give them an answer by the end of the afternoon. So, would you mind if I?" I said, "It's called Four Weddings and a Funeral. I bet I'm the funeral," merrily, and lo and behold. But when I, just as I had when I read Shirley Valentine, I just, at the end of reading it, I just knew that I'd had a gold bar in my hand. It was just of such wonderful wit and humanity, and the character of Gareth, and that was exactly what I've been talking about, of Gareth and Matthew, were two men who loved each other deeply and sexually and passionately, and were part of life, part of a group of many other people of different sexual persuasions and so on. Absolutely the center of it. And I still think that the line that Hugh has after the funeral is one of the most radical things that any British audience had to hear, which was that Hugh says, we go around, thinking about all these, getting married and dreaming about marriages and so on and so on, and all the time, right in the midst of us, there was a marriage. There was a marriage, and this is, of course, long before gay marriage. There was a marriage, and it was Richard. I just salute Richard to the heights for what he created in that, and the fact that neither Matthew nor Gareth were stereotypically gay. They weren't in any way cardboard cutouts of gay people. They were just people. I mean, I know that Richard based them on a couple of friends of his who not, they didn't look like John and me, but they were an exuberant and loving gay couple, and it just told them. I really was kind of bewildered. I got letters from people saying, I very much enjoyed the film, and I have to say I hadn't realized until I saw the film that homosexual people have feelings. And I wrote back and I said, "That's all we have."
Oh, well, I think we're running out of time, and that's all we have. Feelings is probably as inspiring a thought to end on than any. Thank you so much, Simon, for
Just great.
sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you to everybody at Silver Pride. Remember, you can donate to Silver Pride by going to www.silverprideuk.com, and your donation will go to supporting grassroots LGBT plus groups. And if you enjoyed this session, there's plenty more on the Silver Pride program. Do please check it out. We also, having talked about the importance of words and the key that reading provides you with, we encourage you to support your local independent bookshop, or indeed to visit gaystheword.co.uk. Fabulous place, wonderful. Buy all of my gay writing from it. Thank you, Simon, for all of that. It's been lovely to talk to you as ever, and I hope you stay cool. Try going to sit on a beach for a little bit at least.